9 years ago, a woman died in silence. No headlines, no justice. Just one name buried in a file so deep, even time forgot it. But Jasmine Crockett didn't forget, because that name was her secret. For almost a decade, she rose through the ranks, praised for her passion, celebrated for her fire. But behind every applause, behind every camera flash, she carried the weight of what she never said. And now, tonight, in a packed hearing room, broadcast to 12 million Americans, Senator J.D. Vance does the unthinkable. He says the name, and the air shifts. What follows is not just a political clash. It's a collapse of masks, a war of memory, and a battle over the very soul of public trust. Because when your darkest hour is dragged into the light on live TV, the real question is no longer, did you survive the past? It's, can you survive the truth? Before we begin, a gentle note, though fictional in its details, is rooted in the emotions we all recognize: fear, hope, betrayal, redemption. It's been dramatized not just to entertain, but to reflect the deeper truths that facts alone often can't express. While names and moments have been imagined, the heart of it, the longing for justice, the sting of consequence, the fight for dignity, is achingly real. Let this journey move you, not because every word is fact, but because every feeling is true. The air inside the chamber was thick, not just with the scent of polished wood and starched suits, but with expectation. The nation was watching. Camera lights glowed overhead like artificial suns, and beyond them, millions of eyes were tuned in from living rooms, smartphones, airport lounges, waiting. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett sat centered beneath the amber ring of spotlights, her silhouette proud, lips poised, fire flickering just behind her composure. This wasn't just another session. This was the American Economic Security Act, the bill she had poured months into, crafted not in back rooms, but in laundromats, church basements, factory parking lots. Every word she spoke carried the weight of single mothers, of laid-off welders, of people whose voices had been drowned by corporate noise. "We stand," Jasmine said, her voice strong yet tender, "not just for job numbers, but for dignity, for the man in Akron who lost his pension, for the waitress in Biloxi working double shifts while her child sleeps in the booth. This bill doesn't give handouts, it gives hope back." A hum of approval vibrated through the room. Even her critics paused, for a second. And then, "Madam Chair," came a voice, calm, calculated, with the cold confidence of someone who'd waited not just weeks but years for this moment. All heads turned. Senator J.D. Vance rose slowly from his seat, his hand holding something red. A folder, not blue, not white, red, as if warning sirens were folded into paper. Jasmine looked up, her brow furrowed ever so slightly. J.D. Vance didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He flipped open the folder with surgical precision. The mic crackled. Then came the words, "Do you remember the name? Talia Reese?" You could hear it, that moment of breathlessness, the oxygen leaving the room. Gasps rippled not just from the chamber, but from the nation. Phones were turned up, TVs unmuted. In homes across America, people sat forward. And Jasmine? She blinked once. Only once. But it was enough. Her hands, folded neatly just a second ago, shifted under the table. A microsecond of stillness. Too still. J.D. continued, voice steady. "Talia Reese, age 27, graduate student, Austin, Texas, dead." A murmur started in the back. One aide covered her mouth. Another whispered something urgent to a colleague. The chairwoman tapped her gavel once. But the room wasn't listening to her anymore. The room belonged to that name now. Talia Reese. J.D. didn't flinch. He held the paper closer to the mic. And though no image was shown, the chamber saw her. A face, a story, a shadow from the past. Jasmine leaned back in her chair, her jaw tightening. But she spoke with a voice as smooth as velvet laid over steel. "Senator Vance, is this your attempt at theater? Or do you have something relevant to the economic future of this country?" J.D. smiled. Not kindly. If the public is to believe in this bill, they deserve to know who's standing behind it, or hiding behind it. The cameras zoomed. The nation leaned in. Who was Talia Reese? Why did that name wound the air so sharply? And what did Jasmine Crockett have to do with her? The red folder stayed open, and somewhere in the depths of that room, or maybe across 50 states, someone remembered something, something long buried, something Jasmine had hoped the world would forget. For the first time in her political life, she wasn't sure what the next 30 seconds would bring. And neither was America. The silence after JD's final words in the chamber wasn't hollow. It was pregnant, heavy, not just with suspense, but with the feeling that something irreversible had begun. Jasmine's name was trending before the hearing had even recessed. But what caught fire wasn't the bill. It was the name J.D. Vance had uttered, Talia Reese, and J.D. wasn't done. He slid the red folder forward on the polished desk, knuckles tapping it softly, like the calm tick of a bomb about to detonate. "I'm not here to assassinate character," he said slowly, each word spaced like footsteps in a courtroom. "I'm here to ask why this country should trust legislation authored by someone who once let a killer walk free." Murmurs swelled. One lawmaker stood in objection, but the chair allowed J.D. to proceed. "In 2014, J.D. continued, Congresswoman Crockett, then a public defender, was suspended from practicing law in the state of Texas. Not for misconduct, not for bribery, for something far quieter, but far more dangerous." Jasmine didn't flinch, not outwardly, but her eyes narrowed. A single vein pulsed near her temple. "The case was State versus Emerson Wells," J.D. said, turning a page, revealing documents now displayed on the hearing side monitors. "A domestic assault charge, simple on paper, tragic in reality." And then he dropped it, the piece Jasmine had prayed would stay buried. "You failed to submit the key piece of evidence that would have put him away. A witness statement, a hospital report. No submission, no conviction." J.D. looked up. His voice softened, but it did not forgive. 3 weeks later, that same man killed his girlfriend. Her name was Talia Reese. You could feel it, in the room, on the live stream. Viewers at home gripping remotes. Grandmothers, truck drivers, law students, veterans. People who'd never heard of this case suddenly felt like they'd known Talia. And in that moment, Jasmine Crockett, the passionate firebrand, the fighter for the forgotten, was staring at her own reckoning. Her voice when it came was clear, but softer than before. "Yes, that was my case, and that mistake, it cost a life. It broke a family, and it nearly broke me." A pause, then she continued. "Not for JD, but for the millions who'd stopped scrolling and started listening. But what you didn't mention, Senator, was that I reported the error myself, that I took the suspension without appeal, that I wrote Talia's mother a letter I never heard back from. I didn't run from it. I lived with it, and I live with it still." Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached for her water, but she didn't drink. She didn't hide. This country is full of men who never take accountability. If you're going to judge a woman who did, then at least tell the whole story. A beat. JD's jaw tightened. For the first time, he didn't reply. And in that beat, something unexpected happened. The public split. Some were outraged, others haunted. Not just by the error, but by her willingness to bleed in public, to name the things she wished she could undo. But no one looked away. And as the hearing continued, the question was no longer just about a bill. It was about who we allowed to lead us. A mistake made once, a life lost, a file reopened, a room stunned. And beneath the cameras and the noise, Jasmine Crockett sat in the center. Not as a hero, not as a villain, but as a woman who once forgot something she could never take back. And the world had just remembered it for her. The echo of her words still lingered in the chamber air, but it was the silence that followed that told the truest story. Jasmine had just laid bare her darkest chapter in front of the nation. The room was still. J.D. Vance hadn't responded. For the first time in his carefully constructed offensive, he had chosen quiet over triumph. And that was perhaps more deafening than any accusation. Jasmine adjusted her mic. Her fingers were steady now, but her voice was not. Chairman, The sound broke. Her throat tightened, cutting her off mid-sentence. Millions were watching, but in that second, she wasn't in Congress anymore. She was back in a small courtroom in Dallas, 2014, watching a man walk free, knowing she had failed to stop him. She could see Talia's face again. Not a photo, but in motion, crying, pleading, trusting. I need a moment, she whispered, barely audible. The committee chair granted a brief recess, but the cameras didn't stop. Within seconds, every news outlet in the country picked up the moment. The red folder, the name Talia Reese, the crack in Jasmine's voice. By the time she reached the hallway outside the chamber, a hurricane had already formed. CNN, 12:05 p.m. What we just saw was unprecedented, said anchor Dana Rylands, eyes narrowed at the screen. A sitting congresswoman emotionally unraveling on live television over a case she thought was long buried. Fox News, 12:07 p.m. This isn't about one woman's pain, a former federal judge snapped. This is about judgment, about whether a woman who overlooked evidence in a murder case should be making national economic policy. MSNBC, 12:11 p.m. There's something almost Shakespearean about it, said legal scholar Anley Carter. The very act of remembering is what's unraveling her. Clips went viral. Hashtags exploded. Hashtag Who Was Talia? Hashtag Jasmine. New hashtag The Red Folder Podcasts raced to record emergency episodes. Experts speculated on the timeline, digging through Jasmine's legal past with an urgency reserved only for blood in the water, but none of them saw her now. Jasmine sat in her private office, door locked, her hands clasped tight in her lap, as if gripping something that couldn't be seen. Her aides stood just outside, unsure whether to knock or leave her alone. No one knew what to say. A notification buzzed on her tablet. Someone had pulled the court transcript from 2014. Another ping. A photo of Talia Reese began circulating, a grainy high school yearbook portrait. She was 17, smiling. The media had built a coliseum overnight. Jasmine knew what came next. Panels, think pieces, late-night punchlines. And somewhere, Talia's mother, who hadn't answered Jasmine's letter 9 years ago, now seeing her daughter's name headline the evening news. The congresswoman had been in hundreds of rooms more intimidating than this one. Debates, depositions, courtrooms full of fury. But this silence, alone with her breath, her regret, and the roar of the world beyond the door, was louder than them all. She looked down at her hands again. In them, she imagined holding the folder, not JD's, but her own, the case file from that year. She remembered the post-it she wrote to herself. Double-check witness list. She had never found it again. And suddenly, the moment didn't belong to politics anymore. She whispered it, not to the camera, not to the press, but to herself, as if saying it out loud gave it form. I never stopped hearing her scream. Long before the cameras. Long before Congress. Jasmine Crockett sat behind a desk in a narrow, overlit office at the Dallas County Public Defender's Office, surrounded by case files, stale coffee, and a version of herself still untouched by public failure. She was 27, fresh out of law school, already burned out, but burning brighter than most. Her desk was cluttered, post-it notes with scribbled deadlines, manila folders stacked in leaning towers, a cracked photo of her law school graduation with her mother standing proudly beside her in a borrowed dress. Jasmine wore the same suit for court every day, not out of fashion, but necessity. Then came case hashtag 342-87T. The client was Jamal Turner, arrested outside a liquor store, charged with domestic assault. The accuser, Talia Reese, 22, waitress, no prior complaints on record. At first glance, the file looked typical, too typical, the kind of case that passed through the system without resistance, plea bargained into silence. But Jasmine didn't believe in typical. Not yet, not then. She met Jamal the next morning in the holding room. I didn't touch her, he said, no hesitation. We argued, yeah, loud, but I didn't lay a hand. Jamal was lean, articulate, eyes clear. She'd heard that story before. Every public defender had. But something in his voice made her pause. Not the words, the weight behind them. Still, Jasmine knew that truth wasn't a feeling. It was evidence. So she dove in. The initial police report had gaps. No medical records were filed, no photos of injuries. Just a brief statement from Talia, recorded at 2:14 a.m., saying she'd been pushed against a wall and couldn't breathe. Jasmine called Talia to request an interview. She arrived in a hoodie, arms crossed, defensive from the start. "Why do you care what I say now?" she asked, eyes scanning the cramped interview room. He already got away with it once. But when Jasmine pressed for details, her answers shifted. Dates blurred. She contradicted herself twice. First it was a push, then it was a slap, then she couldn't remember. Jasmine didn't assume Talia was lying, just that something didn't line up. Trauma did that to memory. But in a justice system that ran on consistency, inconsistency was fatal. Back at the office, Jasmine logged long nights combing through phone records, texts, witness lists. She was running on caffeine and conviction. Her supervisor warned her gently, "You've got 12 open cases. Don't lose the forest for this one tree." But Jasmine wasn't wired that way. She believed in due process like people believe in prayer. If a hole existed in a case, she'd crawl into it until she understood why. Still, time pressed. Discovery deadlines approached. And something was missing. There was a security camera across the street from the liquor store. The footage could have confirmed Jamal's version of events. Jasmine requested it, but the file came back blank, corrupted. "Unrecoverable," the clerk had typed. It nagged at her. She wrote herself a note. "Ask again. Push harder." But a new case dropped that morning. A juvenile charged with armed robbery. Jasmine was reassigned midweek. She never followed up on the tape. In court, she did what she could. She highlighted the gaps, argued reasonable doubt, urged the judge to consider the absence of injury photos, the inconsistent timeline, and it worked. Jamal Turner walked free. Outside the courtroom, Jasmine exhaled. A win, albeit a small one, the kind that didn't make headlines, but mattered to someone. She never saw Talia again, didn't know she had moved, didn't know her mother had reported her missing 12 days later, didn't know the full weight of the file she had closed. Not yet, but it would return, not as a folder, but as a red one. And next time, the courtroom would be televised. A week after the verdict, Jasmine was back in court, defending a teenager caught stealing allergy medicine for his sister. She barely remembered to eat lunch. Her voicemail overflowed with messages. Her inbox had 17 red-flagged emails, but one stuck out. Subject: surveillance footage, case hashtag 342-87T. It came from a city records clerk. Timestamp 2:07 a.m., 7 minutes before the original report said the altercation occurred. Jasmine's breath caught. She clicked the file, watched. Jamal stood outside the liquor store, pacing, alone. No one else in sight. A car passed. A man walked a dog. But no sign of Talia Reese. No shoving, no screaming, no wall. Just Jamal arguing with his own shadow. Her pulse raced. This wasn't just support, it was exoneration. The footage was pure gold. She downloaded it, saved it to a labeled drive, and slid it into her folder marked "Motion to Reopen." She even drafted the first lines of her request to the court. She would file it Monday morning. Then Friday happened. The teen with the stolen medication was held over. A protester got arrested during a downtown march and demanded her by name. A senior colleague quit, and 3 of his files were redistributed, 2 of them to her. She had to call a grieving mother in a manslaughter case. The weight piled on. And the folder? It sank to the bottom of her desk. Saturday came, and Jasmine promised herself, first thing Monday. Just one day late, judges forgive things like that. She arrived early, coffee, focus, determination, until the bailiff knocked. "Ms. Crockett, courtroom 3. Now." Not her case, not her judge. But someone needed coverage, and she was the name they called. By the time she returned to her desk, it was 2:47 p.m. The court's electronic system closed at 3 p.m. She rushed to upload the file. The screen blinked red. Deadline passed. Motion rejected. No exceptions. Jasmine stared at the monitor. Her stomach dropped. She called the clerk's office, left messages, tried Chambers. The answer came back cold. Judge Rourke has already closed the docket. Final ruling stands. A procedural wall, unmovable, merciless. She told herself Jamal had already been released. Told herself the evidence would have only confirmed what was already decided. Told herself it wasn't malpractice, just bad timing. But a sliver of dread remained. Then came the headline. Woman found dead in Oaklawn apartment. Suspect in custody. Jasmine nearly scrolled past, but the name stopped her. Talia Reese. She clicked. The article said she was found unconscious in her apartment. Blunt force trauma. She had called 911 twice the week prior. Neighbors reported shouting. The suspect? Jamal Turner. He was arrested at the scene. Blood on his hands. The same hands Jasmine had fought to keep out of prison. Her chest hollowed. She read it again and again. The timeline was a dagger. 12 days after his release, Talia was dead. And the footage, the one that might have paused the system, might have triggered a deeper investigation, might have led to supervised release, had sat unopened in a manila folder on her desk. She didn't cry. Not then. Not yet. Instead, she walked to the break room, closed the door, pressed her back to the wall, and whispered the words that would follow her for the rest of her life. I missed it by one day. No camera captured that moment. No journalist reported it. But in Jasmine's memory, it looped louder than any headline. And years later, in a congressional hearing room lit for national television, J.D. Vance would call that memory by name. The sun hadn't fully risen when Jasmine Crockett stood in her kitchen, staring blankly at the toaster as if willing it to reverse time. Her hands moved on instinct, mug, coffee, cabinet, but her mind was elsewhere. That headline from the night before replayed in looping fragments. Talia Reese, dead. Suspect, Jamal Turner. She turned on the TV, hoping maybe it had been a mistake, a misreport, a false name. It wasn't. The news anchor's voice was calm, clinical. New details this morning in the Oaklawn murder case. The victim, 28-year-old Talia Reese, was found strangled in her apartment late Friday evening. Police have confirmed the arrest of 31-year-old Jamal Turner, who had previously been charged with domestic assault against Reese earlier this year. Jasmine's hand trembled. The mug slipped. Glass shattered against tile. Coffee sprayed like a wound opening across the floor. She didn't move, didn't speak, just stared at the screen as her world collapsed quietly in the background. The anchor went on. Sources close to the investigation confirmed that the victim had contacted law enforcement twice in the past 2 weeks, citing threats and prior assault. Neighbors say they heard screaming on multiple nights. Authorities are reviewing the case's prior handling. The walls around her closed in. Time had no edges. She couldn't breathe. She didn't know how she got to the office. Didn't remember traffic or stoplights or the smell of the rain. But at 9:04 a.m., she walked through the Legal Aid Center's front door, hair damp, clothes rumpled. Her eyes locked straight ahead. Her hand clutched her case folder like it was a shield. Jasmine. The voice cut through the hall. It belonged to Robert Caldwell, her supervising attorney. Stern, brilliant, rarely rattled. She turned, met his gaze. He held a single sheet of paper in his hand. This came in this morning, he said, voice steady. DA's office requesting documentation on the Turner case. Apparently there's a review. Jasmine said nothing. He took a step closer. Did you know about the footage? Her lips parted, but no words came. He already knew. Robert's eyes didn't blink. You had it, Jasmine. The footage. It was time-stamped. Had it been submitted, protocol would have required at least a reevaluation. They wouldn't have dropped the charge so easily. She tried to explain. I meant to file. You meant to, he snapped, voice slicing through the air. You had the evidence. You had the power, and you didn't move. Her hands shook. She felt 20 years old again, fresh out of law school, trying to prove she belonged. But now she wasn't just failing upward. She was falling, and someone else had paid the price. He stepped closer, lowered his voice to a knife's edge. You killed her, Jasmine, with your silence. The words struck harder than she expected. He didn't yell. He didn't have to. They landed like a verdict, Guilt, until then abstract, suddenly had weight. It settled on her shoulders like wet concrete. She looked away, blinking fast. "Do you understand what happens now?" Robert asked. "There will be questions, hearings, reviews, and you're not ready for any of it." "I know. No, you don't," he said. "Because if you did, you would have come clean the moment you saw her face on the news. Instead, you came in here like nothing happened. That silence, it's not just paperwork. It's blood." He left her there, frozen. The office around her hummed with printers and footsteps, and the distant sound of someone laughing in the break room. But Jasmine stood still. And when she looked down at her hands, she didn't see skin. She saw blood. The summons came quietly, delivered in a plain envelope with the seal of the state bar embossed in faded gold. Jasmine didn't need to open it. She already knew. It was the beginning of the end, or at least what would feel like one. By the time she sat before the disciplinary committee, 3 weeks had passed since Talia Reese's death. The press had moved on, but inside the legal community, the whispers had grown louder. There were no protesters outside, no cameras, just the silence of consequence, slow and cold. The hearing room was sterile. White walls, long table, bottled water lined up like a failed attempt at hospitality. Jasmine sat alone, no attorney by her side. She'd waived counsel, not out of pride, but punishment. Some part of her felt she deserved to be unarmed. Across from her sat the committee, 5 members, robes off but judgment intact. One of them, a woman in her 60s with a tight bun and colder eyes, flipped through the report like it was a eulogy she had read too many times. Jasmine watched the page turn, then another. Finally, the chair cleared his throat. "Ms. Crockett," he began, "we've reviewed the case materials. You were the lead public defender in State versus Turner. The court record confirms a crucial piece of video evidence, submitted late, was excluded from trial. That exclusion contributed to the dismissal of charges against Mr. Turner, who later committed homicide." Jasmine didn't flinch. Her back was straight, hands folded. "You had possession of the footage for, what, 5 days?" "Yes," she said, her voice calm. "I received it on the Thursday before the deadline. I intended to file it Friday. We had 2 emergency arraignments, then Monday came. I missed it." "And you didn't notify the court or opposing counsel afterward?" She shook her head once. The woman with the bun leaned forward. "Ms. Crockett, do you understand the gravity of your omission?" Jasmine looked up. Her voice, when it came, was flat but steady. "Yes." Another member, younger, tried a gentler angle. "You've served in good standing for 7 years. No prior complaints. You've taken cases no one wanted. You've fought for clients who could barely speak for themselves. Why not defend yourself now?" The question floated in the air. Jasmine looked down. "Because she can't," she said softly. No one needed to ask who. The rest of the hearing passed like a procession. Formalities, findings, recommendations. Jasmine didn't object, didn't justify. When asked if she had anything to say in her defense, she replied, "No." At the end, the chair folded his hands. "The committee finds a violation of professional conduct standards. We recommend a 9-month suspension of your license to practice law, effective immediately." There were no gasps, no objections, just finality. She stood. They offered a curt nod. She gave a small one in return. When she walked out of the building, the air outside felt sharper than before, cutting through her coat, her pride, her name. She passed the front steps slowly, almost reverently, as though each one marked a step further from the life she had believed in. No one was waiting for her. No headlines. No redemption. Just her reflection in a glass door, smudged, tired, and barely recognizable. Yet even as she descended the stairs, her mind wasn't on her future. It was stuck on a voice that only she could hear. Talia's scream. It hadn't stopped, and Jasmine wasn't sure it ever would. The days blurred. At first, Jasmine told herself it was just fatigue, that her body was catching up on years of sleep debt from the courtroom grind. But by the second week, she stopped pretending. She wasn't tired. She was unraveling. The license was gone. Her phone had stopped ringing, and the silence, once a relief, became a cruel companion. She no longer opened her blinds. Sunlight felt too clean, too undeserved. Her once pristine apartment, always organized, always humming with some quiet jazz in the background, grew still. Dishes piled up. Post-it notes on her refrigerator faded with time. Reminders of hearings, meetings, deadlines, all meaningless now. She couldn't look in mirrors. Not because of vanity, because of truth. Every time she passed one, on the back of the bathroom door, above the sink, beside her closet, she flinched. Not at what she saw, but at what she didn't. The confidence was gone. The fire. The clarity. All that remained was someone she didn't recognize. Her eyes were ringed in shadows, her posture collapsed inward, as if trying to vanish into herself. The worst moments were the mornings. She would wake up startled, heart pounding, as if she'd just heard Talia scream again. Sometimes in that dazed liminal space between dreaming and waking, she imagined the case had never happened, that she could still walk into a courtroom, that her voice still mattered. But the dream always died the moment she reached for her phone and remembered there was no one to call. She opened her laptop once. The screen glowed for a moment with a half-written resume. She stared at it, then pressed delete. She couldn't picture herself applying anywhere. What was she supposed to say? Suspended due to negligence, followed by national disgrace? No, that version of her, Jasmine the fighter, the believer in justice, was on indefinite leave, maybe permanent. Instead, she began writing something else. At first, just one letter, then another, handwritten on old line stationery she found in a box from law school. They were addressed to Miss Reese, Talia's mother. Jasmine didn't know her first name, didn't even know if she was still alive. But the act of writing made her feel, if only for a few minutes, less weightless. The first letter began simply, "I failed your daughter. There is no excuse I can offer that would ever make it right, but I owe you the truth, even if I can never deliver it." In later letters, she wrote about Talia's voice, how she wished she'd listened harder, how her gut had warned her to double-check everything, to call the clerk, to push through the exhaustion. But she didn't, and someone's daughter never got to grow old. Jasmine stacked the letters in a drawer, never sealed them. She couldn't decide what was worse, sending them and causing fresh pain, or keeping them and pretending it never happened. Either way, she wasn't ready. Sometimes she would pull one out and reread it. Her handwriting was tighter now, angrier. Some letters ended mid-sentence. She began to wonder if guilt had a half-life, or if it just settled into your bloodstream forever. Evenings were the hardest. She'd pour a cup of tea, sit on her sofa, and watch the door. Not because she expected anyone to walk through it, but because she hoped irrationally that something might shift, that redemption might come knocking. It never did. And yet, in that hollow stillness, something stirred. Not hope, not yet, but something quieter. A flicker of resolve. The kind that doesn't shine, the kind that simmers. She wasn't ready to forgive herself. She wasn't sure she ever would. But the woman in the mirror, though broken, was still watching. And maybe that meant something. It was late October when Jasmine finally stepped outside the cocoon of her silence. The air was heavy with approaching rain, and the clouds above D.C. gathered like judgment. She didn't check the forecast. She didn't care. The sky, the cold, the coming storm. It felt appropriate. She drove without music. Past the courthouse she hadn't entered in almost a year. Past the mural of civil rights leaders she used to nod at with pride. Past the neighborhood where she'd once met Talia Reese for the first and last time. Jasmine's hands gripped the wheel tighter as the streets grew unfamiliar. Somewhere on the edge of Maryland, tucked between rows of pines and flat stones, was the place she needed to go. The cemetery was almost empty. Only the groundskeeper's truck sat idling at a distance, wipers thumping in the mist. Jasmine stepped onto the path, shoes crunching over wet gravel, then softening into mud as she reached the burial rows. Her coat soaked quickly. She didn't mind. Her heartbeat was louder than the rain. Plot 42, B row 7. She stood there for a long time before she crouched down, pressing her palm against the cool stone. Talia Reese, 1993 to 2014. A voice that deserved to be heard. The simplicity of the inscription broke her. Her breath hitched. Her knees gave way, not from the rain, not from exhaustion, but from everything that had finally caught up to her. She had imagined this moment so many times, rehearsed apologies in her mind, crafted speeches, but now, face to face with silence, she knew none of them mattered. What mattered was the truth. From her coat pocket, Jasmine pulled out a folded slip of paper. Small, water-stained, creased from too many second thoughts. She placed it carefully at the base of the gravestone, anchoring it with a pebble so the wind wouldn't carry it away. I let you down, but I will spend the rest of my life trying to lift someone else up. She whispered the words again, lips barely moving. I should have fought harder, listened closer, stayed longer. I failed you, Talia, but I won't let your name vanish into a mistake. I promise. The wind howled through the trees above her. The rain came harder now, flattening the grass and making her hair cling to her cheeks. But Jasmine didn't move. Not yet. She needed the cold. She needed to feel something real. Only when her fingertips went numb did she rise. As she turned to leave, she didn't look back. Not because she didn't care, but because she finally could carry it forward. That night, back in her apartment, she didn't delete the note she had written. She framed it. Just a small wooden frame from the corner store, tucked beside her desk. Quiet, steady. For the first time in months, Jasmine slept without waking from screams. The guilt had not vanished. The pain was still stitched into every memory. But something new had arrived, unannounced and delicate as a seed cracking in darkness. Not absolution. Not yet. But purpose. And purpose, she thought, could bloom where shame once stood, if you had the courage to plant it. The plaque outside the building read, Washington Community Legal Aid, though Jasmine never told anyone her last name when she walked in each morning. She didn't need to. Here, no one asked where you came from, only who you were here to help. It was a low-slung structure tucked behind a metro station, wedged between a bodega and a nail salon. Inside, the paint peeled near the windows, the copier broke weakly, and the coffee machine gurgled like an asthmatic. But it was the first place in months where Jasmine didn't feel like she had to hide her face. She had taken the job quietly. No interview. Just a whispered referral from a former colleague who still believed she had something left to give. Officially, she was a paralegal volunteer, helping with intake and translation and backlog paperwork. Unofficially, she had begun to change lives again. One file, one name, one silent fight at a time. On a rainy Thursday, not unlike the day she visited Talia's grave, a case landed on her desk. Luis Ortega, 28, undocumented, accused of petty theft. The file was thin. No prior offenses, no statement. The charge? Stealing a flashlight from a hardware store, an item he later tried to return. Immigration had already flagged his name. The clock was ticking. Jasmine stayed late that night, pouring through affidavits and arrest logs. Something didn't sit right. The flashlight was never logged into evidence. The arresting officer had no badge number on record. And the store manager? A known agitator with a history of mistaken accusations? She didn't sleep. The next day, she filed a motion to suppress the charge, citing due process violations and probable cause inconsistencies. She used her old strategies, but carefully, through others. She coached a young legal intern to deliver it in court. It worked. The judge dismissed the case. Luis Ortega walked out of detention the next morning, clutching a plastic bag with his belt, his phone, and a note Jasmine had written in Spanish that simply read, "You matter. Don't forget that." He never saw her face. She watched from the back of the courtroom, coat pulled tight, eyes damp. Not from guilt, but something quieter. Something closer to peace. That afternoon, the head of the clinic approached her. "You should consider coming on full-time. We could use someone like you," he said. Jasmine smiled faintly. "I'm just a volunteer." "But you're not invisible," he replied. "Even when you want to be." She didn't answer. Just returned to her desk, where a new folder waited, another name, another fight. That night, walking home beneath the low hum of streetlights, Jasmine passed a mural on the side of a church wall. It was weathered, cracked at the corners, but still visible. Justice isn't a sound. It's a choice. She paused. The wind tugged at her coat, but she didn't move. Her reflection in the darkened glass beside the mural, didn't look like the same woman who once avoided mirrors. There were new lines around her eyes, yes, but also a steadiness in her mouth, a quiet vow. Inside her, something had shifted. The law had once felt like a weapon, turned against her, against the vulnerable, against the truth. But here, in this modest little clinic where no one clapped and no one filmed, the law was a tool again. Not perfect, not pure, but still capable of building, not just breaking. The law failed me, she thought, but I won't fail people again. No cameras, no audience, no applause. And that was exactly how she wanted it. The folder on Jasmine's desk was still warm from her hands when the knock came. It was late. The clinic was nearly empty, the overhead lights buzzing with fatigue. Jasmine looked up to see Aria Brooks, a local community organizer she'd known in passing, standing in the doorway with a flyer in her hand and a spark in her eyes. "Jasmine," Aria said, stepping in without waiting for an invitation. "We need to talk." Jasmine set her pen down. "About what?" Aria placed the flyer on the desk. It was a hastily printed flyer for a candidate forum in South Dallas. The banner at the top read, "Seeking the next voice for Texas House District 109. "Don't laugh," Aria said quickly, "but I think you should run." Jasmine blinked. "You're kidding. You've been helping people quietly for years. You know policy, you know pain, and you sure as hell know how the system breaks. We don't need another polished face. We need someone who remembers what it's like to be shattered and still stand up again." Jasmine leaned back, arms crossed, skeptical. "You realize I have a scandal in my past. An ugly one. The kind that doesn't go away." "I'm not asking you to hide it," Aria said. "I'm asking you to own it. People are done with perfection. They want someone with scars. Someone who didn't just read about brokenness in a report, but lived it." For days, Jasmine carried that thought with her like a stone in her coat pocket. At the clinic, she moved through cases with precision, but something had shifted. Her fingers hovered longer over the names. She saw beyond the forms, to the stories, the structures, the laws that needed changing, not just navigating. One night, she found herself walking a neighborhood she hadn't visited since law school. A mural had been painted over the old community center, this one newer, more defiant. "Scars are not shame. They are proof we healed." She stood there for a long time. That weekend, she went to see Aria. No makeup, no announcement, just 2 words. "I'm in." And with that, Jasmine Crockett's campaign was born, not in a press room, but in a folding chair inside a borrowed church basement, surrounded by people who had been ignored, counted out, and cast aside. Her campaign slogan wasn't polished. It didn't rhyme. It wasn't written by a consultant. It came from her journal, from a moment she never thought anyone else would see. "We don't need heroes. We need people who remember what it's like to bleed." At her first town hall, someone stood up, an older woman in the back with tremors in her voice, and asked, "Weren't you the lawyer from the Talia Reese case?" The room fell silent. Jasmine didn't flinch. "I was," she said, "and I carry that every day, not as shame, but as a reason to never look away again, a reason to fight for laws that protect victims instead of burying them, a reason to listen harder, especially when a woman's voice is trembling." There were no gasps this time, just stillness, and then applause, quiet, respectful, and from every corner of the room. That night, as Jasmine packed up her notes and wiped down the fold-out table herself, she caught her reflection in a window pane. Her eyes were older now, yes, but clearer. She no longer flinched from her own gaze. She wasn't running from her past. She was running with it. The scars, the failures, the promises she had once broken and now vowed to rebuild. No mask, no rewrite, just truth. The name wasn't on the draft, not in the margins, not even in the private notes attached to the proposal. But Jasmine knew. She knew exactly who the bill was for. After months of grassroots campaigning, of kitchen table forums and door-to-door conversations, Jasmine Crockett stood on the floor of the Texas State House, clutching her first official legislative proposal. Her hands didn't tremble, not anymore. The document bore a title that sounded dry, procedural, almost forgettable to most. the Timely Filing Act. But for Jasmine, the title rang like thunder. The bill required public defenders to receive automated alerts for pending evidence filings, ensured secure timestamp submission logs, and mandated independent oversight if deadlines were missed. It wasn't about punishment, it was about prevention, about closing the gap between good intentions and irreversible consequences. The language was clean, the policy airtight, and the motive hidden. I've spoken with defenders across the state, Jasmine said at the committee hearing, voice steady, gaze unwavering. Most want to do the right thing. They're drowning in caseloads, buried under bureaucracy, and many don't have basic tools to track filings. This bill doesn't shame, it supports. An older Republican from rural West Texas tilted his head. You're saying this isn't a partisan issue? No, sir, Jasmine replied. It's a human one. To her surprise, the resistance was quiet, sparse, a few procedural questions, a brief delay for budget review, and then momentum. Support came not just from her own party, but from across the aisle. A veteran senator whispered during recess, "My nephew got locked up for something he didn't do. His lawyer missed a deadline too. I'll back you." The bill cleared committee by a wide margin, then the full House, then the Senate. Reporters asked if it was based on a personal case. Jasmine always gave the same answer. This is for every victim of silence, intentional or not. But behind closed doors, she returned again and again to the memory of Talia Reese, the missed deadline, the echo of a scream, the shaking glass in her hand. She never said the name aloud in chambers, never wrote it on a single version of the bill. Yet the presence of that name lived in the pauses of her voice, in the way she lingered at the podium a moment longer after every vote, in the quiet conviction of her closing line each time. We owe the people better, all of them. After the governor signed the bill into law, Jasmine skipped the press conference. Instead, she walked alone to the archives room where the signed document would be filed. She stood before the cabinet where it would rest permanently and pulled from her coat pocket a single folded piece of paper. No seal, no date. On it were 4 words, "For the one forgotten." She didn't file it. She didn't even leave it. She just held it in her hands, letting the weight settle. That night, Jasmine returned to her small office at the edge of the Capitol. She sat at her desk, the same one where she had once written letters she never sent, and looked at the framed news clipping of the bill's passage. There was no photo of her beside it, just the text. Clean, unemotional. She traced her fingers along the headline. Then, almost too softly to hear, she whispered, "Not yet," and turned off the light. The posters went up overnight. Black letters on white paper. No logos, no signatures. Just one question in all caps. How many more Talias do we need? It was J.D. Vance's voice behind the campaign. He never said it outright, but everyone knew. The whisper of it spread through the Capitol like smoke. Someone was finally willing to dredge up what Jasmine had buried beneath bills and speeches. Her silence, her mistake, her scar. Cable networks ran a 5-minute reel on the forgotten case of Talia Reese. It opened with the grainy mugshot of Jamal Turner, then court footage of a younger Jasmine, tired eyes, pressed suit, no smile. Then a split screen, one side with the evidence she failed to submit in time, the other with Talia's obituary. The headline crawled across the screen and read, "Texas rep under fire for deadly case she never faced." Jasmine said nothing at first, not in public, not even to her staff. But the silence wasn't a shield this time. It was a countdown. Then the summons came, a formal request from the Oversight Committee, testimony required. The hearing was scheduled for Tuesday morning, and within hours the press dubbed it The Reckoning. The morning of, Jasmine walked through the Capitol basement entrance. Same as always, but this time, she wasn't anonymous. A protester outside held a laminated photo of Talia, the corners frayed from use. Another wore a t-shirt that read, "She knew. She failed." Inside, the chamber buzzed like a hornet's nest. J.D. sat 2 seats from the chairman, his posture theatrical. He tapped a pen on the desk slowly, rhythmically, as if waiting for a song to begin. Cameras were everywhere, every major network, a few international. Jasmine looked down at her nameplate. Representative, Jasmine Crockett, Texas, and exhaled once, carefully. Representative Crockett, the chairman began, please state your role in the 2014 Turner case. Jasmine didn't blink. I was assigned as public defender for Mr. Jamal Turner. I failed to submit key video evidence in time. The case was dismissed. 3 weeks later, Talia Reese was found dead. Gasps were unnecessary. Everyone already knew. But hearing her say it aloud, so clearly, so plainly, was its own kind of combustion. J.D. leaned forward. So you admit your negligence led directly to a woman's murder? The air thickened. Jasmine paused. I admit that my failure contributed to a system that allowed it, and I have carried that every day since. Carrying it isn't justice, J.D. snapped. How many others have carried coffins because of lawyers like you? The gallery rustled. Jasmine didn't flinch. I became a public defender because I believed in mercy. I stayed silent because I didn't think I deserved any. J.D.'s smile was cold. And now you do. No, Jasmine replied, eyes meeting his. But I don't get to decide what I deserve. I only get to decide what I do next. A woman in the gallery stood. No badge, no sign, just a black blouse and trembling hands. She whispered something, too soft for the mic, but Jasmine heard it anyway. It was Talia's mother. The room hushed. J.D. hesitated. The chairman cleared his throat, glancing at the clock. The rest of the hearing blurred. Policy details, professional codes, procedural minutiae. But none of it mattered more than that single presence in the gallery. That single whisper. Afterward, reporters swarmed her with questions. One stuck out. Do you still believe you can lead? Jasmine looked toward the Capitol dome, pale against the afternoon sky. I don't know if I was meant to lead, she said, but I was meant to answer for what I ran from. And I'm here. Then she walked into the light, her shadow long behind her. The set was sleek, clinical, red and blue lights pulsing from beneath the desk, CNN logos rotating behind layers of glass. The studio audience was small but handpicked. Veterans, activists, law students, and a mother who'd buried her child. Tonight was billed as The Reckoning, Law, Accountability, and the People We Elect. Jasmine Crockett versus J.D. Vance, and America would be watching. She sat to the left, chin lifted, black suit crisp. No jewelry, just a gold pin of the scales of justice on her lapel. J.D. sat opposite, blue tie sharp, smile tight with calculation. Between them, the moderator from CNN, seasoned and silent for now. Congressman Vance, the moderator began, you've called Representative Crockett a walking liability and stated that her past disqualifies her from public office. Would you like to clarify that? J.D. leaned forward, voice smooth. I don't need to clarify it. She walked a killer out the door. Let's not dress that up with legal jargon or second chances. Talia Reese is dead. Because of her, Jasmine didn't blink. Her jaw stayed tight. But in her chest, something twisted. The moderator turned. Representative Crockett, your response? Jasmine inhaled once, slow and steady. Then she spoke. Not from defense, not from pride, but from a place just behind her ribs. I walked myself into a nightmare I never woke up from. A hush rippled through the room. She continued. Yes, I failed. I failed at the most critical moment of my career. I missed a deadline that mattered. I let a man go free who should have been held, and someone died. I carry that with me. Every morning I look in the mirror. J.D. didn't wait. Then why should anyone trust you now? Because I didn't disappear, Jasmine said. Because I chose not to hide behind law degrees or titles. Because I turned my life upside down trying to build something that protects the next Talia. You think shame disqualifies me? I think shame built me. Someone in the audience clapped once, then quickly stopped. J.D. seized the moment. You expect voters to believe that guilt is qualification? That regret is leadership? No, Jasmine said, her voice quiet but clear. But I do believe that broken people understand the cracks in the system better than anyone else. I've been one of those cracks. The moderator interjected. Both of you have strong positions on justice reform, but Representative Vance, if you were in her shoes, underfunded, overloaded. How would you have prevented what happened? JD hesitated, just half a second too long. I wouldn't have taken the case, he finally said. If I couldn't handle the burden, I would have stepped aside. Jasmine leaned in. That's the luxury of hindsight. But back then, we were 10 lawyers serving thousands of cases. There was no stepping aside. There was just surviving. JD's gaze narrowed. So now it's the system's fault? It's everyone's fault, Jasmine replied. The system that starves public defenders. The culture that pretends mistakes don't happen. And yes, me. I carry my share. But don't you dare pretend that slamming a gavel or grandstanding on cable makes you cleaner than the people in the trenches. The moderator gave a subtle signal. 2 minutes left. Final remarks. JD looked directly into the camera. America deserves leaders who don't stumble into blood, who don't need tragedy to grow a conscience. Then Jasmine looked into the lens, as if searching for someone watching from far away. America deserves leaders who tell the truth, even when it costs them, especially when it costs them. The credits began to roll. The moderator thanked the guests. The audience remained still, half in applause, half in silence. Outside, Twitter exploded. Headlines split down the middle. But Jasmine didn't check her phone. She walked out the side door into the dark, past a man selling coffee to the night crew. He looked up and said, "Tough room." She nodded, almost smiling. "Tough truth," she replied. 3 days after the televised debate, Jasmine Crockett sat alone in her office. The blinds drawn, her phone face down on the desk. The headlines hadn't softened. If anything, they'd hardened around her like quick-drying cement. Crockett crumbles under pressure. JD Vance exposes her fatal mistake. The case that should have ended her career. Her staff had stopped trying to cheer her up. She had stopped pretending they could. For the first time since she took office, she considered stepping down. Not because she doubted her calling, but because she was tired. Tired of the weight. Tired of being the center of a wound that never closed. She reached for the resignation letter. It wasn't new. She'd written it a year ago and tucked it in a drawer labeled in case of courage or cowardice. The lines were short, clinical. "It has been my honor to serve. I believe my departure is in the best interest of the people of Texas." She folded it once, slid it into an envelope. That's when she saw it. An envelope slipped under her door while she had dozed off earlier that afternoon. No return address, handwritten in green ink with a child's uneven scrawl, for Ms. Jasmine Crockett. She opened it slowly, more out of habit than hope. "Dear Congress lady, my name is Kara and I'm 11. You don't know me, but I saw you on TV. I didn't understand all the words, but I asked my grandma what you meant when you said the law failed you. She told me you used to be a lawyer for people like my mom. My mom was in jail for something she didn't do. Her lawyer was tired and busy, but she said she heard about this congresswoman who was trying to change things. She said your bill helped her get seen faster. And guess what? She came home. We have dinner now, together, because of you. So I don't know what people say about you, but I think you're good. Not perfect, but good." From Kyra, Tulsa. Oklahoma, Jasmine blinked. Then again. The words sat in her lap like a confession and a blessing all at once. "Because of you, my mom walked free." She read the line 5 times. 10. She pressed the paper to her chest like a talisman. Outside her office, life moved on. The noise of the Capitol filtered in. Footsteps, staffers calling out reminders, the clack of heels against marble. But in that moment, all Jasmine could hear was Kyra. "We have dinner now. Together." She tore the resignation letter in half, then into quarters, then again until it looked like snowfall on her office floor. The sound it made as it crumpled under her palm was the sound of something breaking, but not in her, in the weight that had tried to crush her. Later that evening, she asked her aide to draft a handwritten reply. Jasmine insisted on signing it herself. "Dear Kyra, you just gave me more strength than I've had in months. I'm staying. Not for applause, not for headlines, but for someone else's mother who hasn't made it home yet. With all my heart, Jasmine Crockett." She paused before sealing the envelope and whispered to herself, "Who has the right to speak? Maybe the ones still listening." And with that, she walked back out into the noise, not to defend her past, but to fight for someone else's future. It started on a quiet Wednesday morning. No headlines, no alerts. Jasmine had just finished a district meeting when her phone buzzed with a message from her chief of staff. Turn on MSNBC right now. She hesitated, heart skipping for no good reason. Then the screen lit up. There, sitting across from the anchor in a navy blue dress and pressed silver curls, was Margaret Reese, Talia's mother. The chyron beneath her name read, Breaking 9 years of silence. Jasmine froze. Margaret looked composed. Not warm, not cold. Just steady. The kind of steady that comes from years of swallowing rage, of mourning in quiet, of building a fortress around a wound. The anchor leaned forward gently. Mrs. Reese, this is the first time you've spoken publicly about your daughter's case. Why now? Margaret blinked once, then said calmly, Because I've watched enough people speak for me. There was no accusation in her voice, but there was weight. The anchor continued. There's been renewed discussion about Jasmine Crockett's role. You haven't addressed her directly in all these years. Do you have anything you'd like to say? A long pause. Margaret's hands folded in her lap. Then she looked straight into the camera. That woman writes me every year. The studio went quiet. Every April 17th, without fail. No press release, no signature scent of politics, just a white envelope with a note, a different flower pressed inside each one. Jasmine's breath caught in her throat. She doesn't ask for forgiveness, Margaret continued. She never mentions her job or her name, just writes about the weather, about Talia's favorite songs. Sometimes she includes poems. Once she sent a drawing she said reminded her of Talia's smile. Always ends the same way. Still lifting, still learning. The anchor blinked. You've never responded? Margaret shook her head. Not with words. Do you believe she meant it? Margaret's eyes softened, just for a flicker. She showed up, quietly, consistently. The world talks about justice like it's fireworks, but sometimes it's just silence that keeps showing up. The segment ended. The screen faded. Jasmine sat back, the air knocked out of her, not by guilt, not by grief, but by something else, something like mercy. She didn't cry. She just whispered, still lifting, still learning. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel like a fraud when she said it. By morning, the clip of Margaret Reese's interview had circled the globe. No dramatic music, no clever headlines, just a mother's quiet truth and a line that struck something deeper than outrage. She showed up, quietly, consistently. Within hours, #StillLifting began trending, not because of political operatives, but because of strangers, teachers, nurses, students who had never known Talia, never met Jasmine, but recognized something sacred in that kind of persistence. At a vigil in Tulsa, a young woman held up a sign, Justice is what you do when no one's watching. In Houston, candles formed the shape of a single pressed flower. Jasmine hadn't planned to speak again. She had done enough speaking, too much maybe. But as the calls came in, as campuses held vigils and old reporters asked for context, her staff gently nudged her forward. You don't have to perform, her aide said. Just tell the truth, the quiet one. So she released a statement. No cameras, no press conference, just a letter, posted plainly on her website, imprinted in the Dallas Tribune. I walked into a courtroom once, believing that good intentions were enough. I was wrong. My silence didn't protect anyone, but I kept writing, kept remembering, kept lifting others where I once let one fall. We don't get to rewrite the past, but we do get to decide whether we carry it with cowardice or with care. I carry Talia's name with care. The internet erupted, but differently this time. Not with hashtags or takedowns, but with tributes. Names of loved ones lost, stories of second chances, images of red folders, raised in vigils like lanterns, no longer symbols of shame, but of unflinching truth. J.D. Vance, for once, said nothing. The noise that usually followed him, the pundits, the spin, the war cries, fell still. Because what could you say to a woman who'd already said everything to the one person that mattered? The infamous red file, the one he'd brandished in debates and interviews, was suddenly powerless. No longer a weapon. It had become testimony. Jasmine watched it unfold from her small home office. The light on her desk, soft and unassuming. The same space where she'd once written letters she never thought anyone would read. And now the world was reading. The first time Jasmine visited, it was raining, like the sky needed to weep what she couldn't. She had whispered her guilt into the soil, left a note folded tight like a wound, and walked away with her shoulders hunched under the weight of silence. But this time, she came in daylight. No storm, no shadows, just light filtering gently through the oak trees above the cemetery, and the sound of her footsteps pressing softly against the grass. She walked alone, without press, without staff, carrying nothing but a red folder in her hands, the same folder that had once symbolized her failure. The one JD waved like a sword, the one she'd nearly burned a dozen times. She reached the headstone, Talia Reese, age 27, and stopped. The silence wasn't heavy now. It was sacred. Jasmine knelt slowly and set the red file down at the base of the stone. Not as an offering, not as a burden, but as an acknowledgement. For a long moment she said nothing. Then she exhaled and whispered, "You're not my shame. You're my lesson." She ran her fingers across the engraved letters as though they might speak back. No tears came, not because she didn't care, but because something inside her had changed. Grief no longer hollowed her out. It had become her spine. From her coat pocket, she pulled out a small white flower, one of many left by strangers in recent days. This one she brought herself. "I used to come here hoping to be forgiven," she said, "but that's not what this is. Not anymore." She stood, brushing the grass from her hands. She didn't linger, didn't need to. There was no script to perform, no story to rewrite, just one truth laid bare between them. Jasmine turned back once before walking away, and for the first time in 9 years, she didn't carry the folder with her. She left it behind, not to forget, but so the ground itself would remember, so that whoever passed by that stone might know. Accountability doesn't always come with a headline. Sometimes it comes with the quiet courage to return to where you broke and plant something stronger. The chamber was unusually quiet, not somber, just still, like the air was holding its breath. Jasmine stood at the center of the floor, the final draft of her bill gripped between her fingers. Years of scars, some public, most private, had funneled into these pages. She hadn't planned to name it after Talia. That name for so long had been sacred and unspoken. But now silence felt like another form of avoidance. She cleared her throat. "Madam Speaker, members of Congress, I rise today not just as a lawmaker, but as someone who once failed to act quickly enough, who paid for that delay not with reputation, but with someone else's life." Some heads turned, others bowed. This bill is about the chain of custody, about deadlines met, files tracked, and lives that depend on it. We call it Talia's Law, because we will not forget the cost of forgetting. Her voice never cracked, though her heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear herself. She didn't embellish. She didn't dramatize. She let the clarity of the truth do the work. When the vote was called, she returned to her seat without ceremony. One by one, the names echoed across the chamber, a mix of voices, some sure, some hesitant. Then came the name that made her spine straighten. Senator J.D. Vance. A pause, then, quietly, "Aye." He didn't look at her, didn't nod, didn't blink, but it was there. A kind of silent reckoning, not an apology, but something adjacent. Jasmine didn't smile. She simply noted it and let it pass. As the final tally confirmed overwhelming passage, members stood, not in triumph, not in celebration, but in respect. There was no applause, just a solemn rising, shoulder to shoulder, as if the country itself were standing beside a grave. Jasmine looked up at the chamber, eyes full but dry. This was not victory. This was responsibility honored. And this time, it came not a moment too late. The lecture hall smelled of old wood and fresh ambition. Rows of law students leaned forward as Jasmine stood at the podium, arms resting lightly on the edge. She hadn't planned to accept the invitation from Howard University's law school, but something about the timing felt right. She looked out at them, not at their resumes or their confidence, but at their questions, unasked and hovering just behind their eyes. I was 27, she began. I believed the truth would carry itself, that my job was to speak and the world would listen. A few students nodded, most didn't move. I was wrong. She paced slightly, not for theatrics, but because her thoughts moved faster than stillness allowed. The law is a fragile thing in human hands. It does not hold itself upright. That's your job. A student in the back raised a hand. Do you believe justice is possible? Jasmine smiled faintly. Possible? Yes. Guaranteed? No. And the greatest damage you'll ever do as lawyers will not come from your ignorance. It'll come from your silence. She paused, letting that settle. I once missed a filing deadline by one day. One day. I buried that fact under excuses, schedules, and shame. But the world doesn't care what you meant to do. It cares what you did. No one interrupted, not even the professor in the front row, who was known for sharp interjections. The room was still, not from fear, but from the weight of earned truth. You will make mistakes, Jasmine continued, softer now. But your job is not to pretend perfection. It's to do no further harm. A young woman in the front wiped her eyes discreetly. Jasmine noticed but didn't call attention to it. She simply nodded as if to say, I see you. I once was you. When the lecture ended, the students rose, not with applause but with reverence. A few came forward to shake her hand. One handed her a folded note, another just said thank you and walked away. Jasmine stood by the door a moment longer, letting their presence linger. She had spent so many years trying to outdistance her past, but now she wore it like armor. Not polished, not proud, but unhidden. Because in this seat, where no applause echoed, what remained was something better than redemption, responsibility accepted, and quietly passed on. The memorial was simple, no cameras, no speeches, just a curved wooden bench beneath an oak tree at a small public park in Dallas. Carved into the backrest, in quiet serifed lettering, were the words, Justice isn't perfect, but it must be honest. Jasmine arrived before sunrise. She didn't want an audience, only the sound of birds and the faint wind rustling the leaves. She traced the curve of the wood with her fingers, feeling the grooves where someone had chiseled truth into permanence. The city had funded it, but Jasmine had written the inscription herself. She sat slowly, letting her body settle into the bench like it belonged there. No security, no aid, just her. This park wasn't near the Capitol or the courthouse. It wasn't even near where Talia had lived, but it was where a group of neighborhood teens held their first Know Your Rights workshop. It was where Jasmine once sat years ago in silence, wondering if she'd ever be trusted again. Now this bench would stay. A mother pushing a stroller passed by, nodding politely. A jogger slowed, read the words, and kept going. No one asked for a photo. No one interrupted. That, Jasmine thought, was the point. This wasn't for legacy carved into marble or monuments framed in marble halls. This was for the in-between places, the ones that shaped lives long before they reached headlines. She closed her eyes. The sun was just starting to warm her skin. There were 100 things on her schedule today, a bill to review, a hearing to prepare for, but none of them mattered in this moment. All that mattered was that this space existed, that someone someday would sit here with heavy questions in their heart and find this inscription waiting. Justice isn't perfect, but it must be honest. She reached into her bag and pulled out a single daisy, placed it quietly on the bench beside her, and then, like the closing of a long and unfinished conversation, she whispered, Rest now, Talia. The world heard you. This story reminds us that justice isn't a destination. It's a choice we must make every day, even after we've fallen. Jasmine didn't seek perfection. She chose honesty, responsibility, and healing. Her quiet courage became louder than any headline. Sometimes it's not the loudest voice that changes the world. It's the truest one. Have you ever faced a moment where telling the truth felt harder than staying silent? What did you choose? If this story touches you, don't let it stop here. Like, share, and subscribe to JD Stories, where every voice matters and every story echoes far beyond the screen. This story is a fictionalized and dramatized narrative created for educational, inspirational, and storytelling purposes. While it may be inspired by real public events, people, or societal issues, it includes imagined dialogue, reconstructed scenes, and character interpretations meant to highlight broader themes of justice, dignity, and resilience. Any resemblance to actual events or individuals beyond public knowledge is purely coincidental. We do not intend to defame, mislead, or harm, but to invite reflection and meaningful conversation. Thank you for watching JD Stories.